I'm sorry?
Yeah. So here we are.
Here we are.
Thank you very much, Toni Jaeger-Fine, for being here for this PhD lesson on new technologies and your professional persona. Toni Jaeger-Fine is Assistant Dean of International and Non-JR, the JD program of the Fordham Law School. She also taught and lectured domestically, but also abroad in other European Union member states and also other countries not belonging to the European Union. She's member of the European Journal of Privacy Law and Technologies Review, and she's author of several articles and books. Today, she will present one of her books entitled The Legal Professional Persona, Discovering and Defining Your Professional Persona. So we are very happy to have her here and to can attend her talk on this very important topic that I hope can be an experience for all the students and the PhD students, and an opportunity to interact also with other professionals of our legal system and the American legal system. Toni has a very important curriculum that is composed by different academic titles, but also professional titles, because she was associated with the law firm in Washington, D.C., where her practice was focused on commercial law and administrative litigation. And this is why I'm very happy to have her here today and have this chance to interact with her. She also had different ownership and from the Fulbright program in particular. She was twice Fulbright Senior Specialist program grant recipient. It is a very important scholarship. And we also had the pleasure to meet Toni in person a few years ago before the COVID pandemic for the Fordham alumni, which was an event that took place at Suor Orsola Benincasa University. And in that occasion, we met for the first time. So thank you again to Toni Jaeger-Fine to be here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that very generous introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here. I have to say, I smile when you speak of that visit to Naples. I'd been to Italy many times, but I'd never been to Naples until, I guess that was about 3 or 4 years ago. Time has taken on a very strange turn, and I had such an amazing time. Of course, Naples is amazing. The food is amazing. The beauty is amazing, but above all, the people were just so warm. A lot of people from Southern Italy, first generation people whose parents came from Southern Italy, Naples and Sicily. And so I felt very, very at home. I am so honored to take part in this program hosted by Professor Gott's chair. And I want to thank Professor Gott, of course, and everyone in the chair who has been so warm and welcoming. And I want to thank all of you for being here. And as was indicated, I'm going to talk about my book called Becoming a Lawyer, Discovering and Defining Your Professional Persona. And I was told that I had to talk about new technologies, that this series is about technology. And I thought initially, what am I going to do? This is a disaster. I don't really understand technology. I consider it a great success if I can log into to Teams or Meet or Zoom on a particular day. But I gave it some thought, and I realized that there's actually a tremendously close connection between new technologies and building your professional persona. So I'm going to try to demonstrate that today. At the moment, my view does not allow me to see you. So if anyone has a question along the way, feel free to just unmute yourself and say, Toni, can I ask a question? And as soon as I hear you, I'll stop, but we'll also have plenty of time at the end for questions as well. I want to talk a little bit by changes to law practice. And as I'm going to tell you about in a moment, I've been running a program at Fordham Law School on structural issues in law firm management. And I've learned a tremendous amount about what's going on in the legal profession these days. And I did practice law, but I practiced law from 1986 until 1991 or 92. And I have to say that I have seen an enormous shift in law practice from what has always been viewed as a noble profession to more of a commercial undertaking. And when I say that, it is not a negative. It is still a noble profession. I deeply love this profession. I would, if I had my professional life to live all over again, I would choose law 100 times. Since I can't be a rock and roll star, I would choose law all over again. But we have seen quite a shift from a noble profession to a commercial undertaking. And this, I believe, has been fueled by various factors. And I want to look at what some of those factors have been. One is the rise of new law firm models. And I think this is something we've seen accelerated by COVID, but it didn't begin with COVID. It began before COVID. We see accordion firms that sort of expand and contract to meet the need of the client base. Remote firms, which of course was greatly accelerated, but did not begin with COVID. Specialized firms that are boutique or otherwise super specialized as opposed to being general practice firms. Alternative service providers, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. Law firm staffing has evolved. When I practiced law in the Stone Ages, we had partners, we had associates, and we had a few secretaries. We maybe had a person who handled the finances, and we had a person who handled hiring. Today, at least at large US and large Italian, large British, large firms, we see a C-suite of professional non-lawyer or non-practicing staff. A chief marketing officer, a chief people officer, a chief well-being officer, chief financial officer, all sorts of C-suite professionals that we didn't see before, and their staffs. We see a talent war, an extraordinary talent war. We're seeing it in the US. I'm sure you're also seeing it in Italy, and we're seeing it in other parts of the world. The war is for talent, not bodies. So some of my students say, oh, I should be able to get a job easily because there's this great talent war. Yes, if you actually bring talent. Talent is incredibly important. Why? First of all, in a personal services firm, talent is the lifeblood. Law firms don't produce widgets. They don't produce phones. They don't produce books. They don't produce anything. They produce work that is generated by individuals. So the personal services nature of law firms makes talent the only really important asset. Investment in talent is costly and precarious. It is costly because lawyers at big firms make a lot of money. And in particular, because many clients refuse to pay for the for the hours spent by junior talent. So I have a friend who is the chief legal officer of quite large publicly traded company. And he says, I do not pay for the time of first or second year associates. I don't pay for that. If the firm wants to put them on the case so that they can learn something, fine, but I will not pay for any of their billable hours. So firms make a huge investment in junior talent. And then there's vigorous lateral movement, which means by time an associate starts to pay for himself or herself, many of those associates move on to other firms or other kinds of practices. And so it's an incredibly expensive endeavor to recruit, onboard, and retain talent. Another change that we've seen in recent years, decades, is enhanced competition in the market for legal services. Enhanced competition among traditional market players, so firm A competing with firm B, but also new market entrants. In many places in the world, including Italy, of course, you have the big four accounting firms that are practicing law. That is not permitted in the United States yet, but they are making inroads in many, many places around the world. and as I mentioned before, alternative service providers, and the unbundling of legal services. So let me just give you an example from my own practice area. I was a litigator. And back in the day, law firms, I, as a young associate, had to do a lot of document review. Now, document review can be sent off-site to a firm that has artificial intelligence, which is something we'll also talk about when we get to technology, and other sort of expedients that enable discovery to be done more efficiently and more effectively than I was doing it, for example, as a junior lawyer. We have competition. Lawyers face competition with clients. There is what's called a build rather than buy movement, which means that many in-house departments of substantially sized companies are finding it more effective and more efficient to increase the size of the legal departments rather than going out to external attorneys. So there's actual competition from clients themselves who are providing greater and greater and more sophisticated and more specialized legal services than they ever were. There's something called the more for less movement. The more for less movement means, and you probably can figure this out, clients, like everyone else, want more service for less money. Their budgets are constrained, as are the budgets of many other organizations. And what we call law firm convergence, which means, let's imagine a large multinational company. And let's say at one point they had 200 law firms on their panel, 200 law firms from which they would select. I use firm A for this particular labor law matter in the United States. I use firm B for antitrust matters in Italy, and so on and so forth. What many, many large companies have found is that, again, it is more effective and more efficient to have fewer panels, fewer lawyers on their law firms on their panels from which they choose. We've also seen increased competition from the enhanced transparency and the rise of in-house counsel. When I practiced law, in-house counsel, to be honest, I didn't work with millions of in-house counsel. I worked with dozens of in-house counsel. And I would say that in general, they were far less sophisticated and far less knowledgeable than they are today. And I viewed many of those clients as basically a clearinghouse where they would sort of manage outside counsel, but didn't really have a lot of knowledge about many of the substantive matters. They also weren't able to easily share information amongst themselves. In-house counsel have become increasingly sophisticated. They understand what we're doing. I say we, I'm not a practicing lawyer right now, but outside counsel, they understand what we're doing. They understand the nuances of the law, and they can really challenge us in ways that they couldn't before. There's also incredible amount of transparency, which means the general counsel of company A can easily compare his experience with the general counsel of company B, who can easily compare her experiences with the in-house counsel of company C. And there is a tremendous amount of shared information between and among company general counsel about the quality, efficiency, and effectiveness of outside counsel. And so the reputational, your ability to spread a reputation is that much more important and that much more enhanced. Another change to law practice, and here's where I get to what I was told I must speak about, is the rise of technology and its impact on law practice today. And I think it's fairly obvious to anyone now that technology plays an enormous role in law practice today. And I want to start with the American Bar Association Model Rule of Professional Conduct. Rule 1.1 has a comment. And let me just say that there are similar rules in many US states. And my guess is that there is or will be a global trend. And what that rule says, or what that comment says, is that a lawyer must retain competence, and competence requires that she maintain the requisite knowledge and skill, including keeping abreast of changes in the law and its practice, including the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology, and that her continuing legal education requirements must include understanding the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology. In short, I think what this comment is trying to tell us is that a lawyer is not fully competent, consistent with her commitment to the rules of professional conduct, if she is not keeping abreast of relevant technology. What are some of the technological competencies needed by today's lawyer? This includes an enormous array of competencies, some of which I can do and I can do well, some of which I cannot do. But young lawyers entering the profession now, and I've tried to put them more or less in order of things that everybody has to have, to more challenging, more bespoke, more specialized technologies: word processing, presentation software, spreadsheets, online legal research, video conferencing like the one we're on now, email management, online file storage, cloud computing. I think these are things that we all need to have. And I don't think you can go into law practice today and say, oh, I'm sorry, I still write everything out. I need a unless you have some sort of disability related issue. You can't go in and say, I handwrite, I need a secretary to type everything for me. That's just not going to work. Or I don't use email. I don't think anyone can get away with that anymore. To more sort of complex technological solutions, document automation, time tracking and billing solutions. E-signature tools, mobile apps, e-discovery tools, artificial intelligence systems for contract drafting, contract review, contract analytics, litigation prediction. All of these are becoming far more commonplace than they were even 5 or 10 years ago. Practice management software, client portals, cybersecurity for the firm and for clients. And big data and the use of data analytics. And I want to say that in my law firm management, structural issues in law firm management program, I have learned so much about client expectations. And I believe that this is true not only in very large national and international firms, but even in smaller and more medium-sized firms. Clients are expecting portals where they can have real-time access to dashboards that reflect billing, that reflect the status of projects, that reflect outstanding questions, in which drafts are shared. These are the kinds of things that are expected, as is a strong cybersecurity plan. Your firm needs that protection. You need that protection as an individual lawyer, and your clients need that protection. And if a client views that a firm's or a lawyer's cybersecurity solutions are not modern and current, I think that will really undermine the relationship. So what does all this mean for you? Okay, for you, for me, for everyone in the profession? I think it means at least 2 things. One is the obvious. We need technological expertise, and we need technological expertise with a growing level of sophistication. We all need to learn to, the lingo is work smarter, to be more efficient, to be more effective, to get stuff done more quickly, to not spend a lot of time on things that can be done by machine much more effectively. Clients are demanding this on many, many fronts. We should be able to offer productivity and client-centered solutions that are based on technology. And it doesn't have to be heavily sophisticated technology. There are even basic technological solutions that can be very, very effective for knowledge management, for knowledge sharing, for client portals, and so on and so forth. But the other thing, the less obvious, perhaps, answer to the question of what does this mean for you, is it means that your professional persona is increasingly important. Your professional persona becomes much more important during periods of disruption marked by elevated competition. And in my view, that is the period we are going through now. That is the period we have been going through, and we will continue to go through. This is an enormous period of disruption in the profession. And as I indicated earlier, it is marked by enormous competition. What else does it mean? It means that you will spend less time and energy on commoditized work. So the kind of work I did as a young lawyer that I mentioned earlier, I was sitting doing document review. I would get sent to some horrible town. It was never in a great place, like, oh, go to Naples and do document review and eat pizza. No, it was never like that. It was go to Cincinnati or something and spend a month in a terrible hotel and do document review, basically sitting in a room that is too cold, too hot, too dark, too whatever, and be reading documents over time. We don't do that anymore. It is all done with artificial intelligence solutions, to the point where you get from an enormous database, you get a smaller database through which an individual has to look. And so we spend much less time and energy on commoditized work. We have artificial intelligence that could draft basic contracts from templates and so on and so forth. And here's the real opportunity. It is easier now to distinguish yourself through a strong and sustainable professional persona, because you're not wasting time on form contracts and document review and due diligence the way we did 10, 20, 30 years ago. You can shine. You have an opportunity to show how great you are because of your professional persona. And so you might be wondering, what is this thing, the professional persona? So let me define it. The professional persona, this is my definition, and I very much treat it as a work in progress. And by the way, I would very much look forward to your feedback, because this book that I wrote is going into a second edition, and I have a year to write it. So if you do have feedback about the presentation, or if you should read the book or look at the table of contents for free on Amazon, I would love to have your feedback. The professional persona is a set of attitudes and behaviors, nothing to do with substantive knowledge, nothing to do with technical skills, that ultimately drive and determine our success. Attitudes and behaviors. And I want to tell you why I think these are so important. Last year, when we closed our first edition of our Structural Issues in Law Firm Management program, I was honored with giving the closing lecture. And I take this language from that closing lecture. I said, clients above all value the wisdom and judgment. And these pieces in red reflect my view about the professional persona, elements of the professional persona. Clients value the wisdom and judgment that can be offered only by a skilled and active listener, a wise counselor who fully appreciates the primacy of her service role and offers thoughtful and candid risk analysis, an attorney who recognizes the need to innovate, differentiate, and retain currency to most effectively serve her clients, one who is a true partner to the business and part of an integrated law firm that is aligned around purpose, vision, culture, and service. How do you get there? You get there through a professional persona. So let's just, before I talk more about the professional persona, let me talk about some challenges and opportunities that you have. Challenges, of course, are to keep up with the pace of technology, okay? Especially if you're like me and not very comfortable with technology. I want to say, by the way, that most of you, I don't actually see you at the moment, and I don't even know if you have your cameras on, because I'm in a screen where I can only see my PowerPoint. The challenges of keeping up with technology that challenge is significantly easier for younger people than it is for older people. That gives younger people a real opportunity. Okay, so it's both a challenge and an opportunity. Why? People like me, for the most part, are not comfortable with technology. But you come into a law firm or any kind of organization as a 20, 30-year-old, you're just much more comfortable with technology because you grew up with it. You don't have the same, some of you may, but for the most part, you don't have the same level of anxiety that people in their 60s do. And so you can really provide opportunities by identifying efficiencies that your older colleagues may not recognize. Another challenge, of course, is this enhanced competition. Your opportunities are to do more interesting work that machines could never do. And in that way, to distinguish ourselves from others and to be able to demonstrate the strength of your professional persona to all stakeholders, right? Your supervisors, your clients, your colleagues, and so on. So what are the elements of this professional persona? What is this thing? There are three sort of pillars, what I call pillars, the foundations of a strong professional persona. What I call self-management, professionalism from the inside, where I myself, when I was writing my book and as I work on it and speak about it, this is where I think I grew the most. And finally, relationships, professionalism with the outside. And we're going to explore a little bit each of these elements. I'm going to start with foundations. And there are 3 foundations. The first is what I call unconscious incompetence. The way in which we move through something called the learning matrix. The learning matrix explains how we learn and develop competencies in things. And I want to say something. Well, let me tell you, the bottom rung on the learning matrix is called unconscious incompetence. And this is a stage. The best description of this is it's known as the happy idiot stage. Okay, you think you're really good at something, but you're horrible at it, or you think it doesn't really matter, or you think that if only you spent 5 minutes trying to learn it, you would be really, really terrific. And my favorite example is me in 1982. I was 20 years old, and I went to Madrid to study for a semester. And I had a certain level of somewhere between confidence and arrogance that my Spanish, my ability with Spanish language was really good. Why? Because of the gringos in my university. I was the best Spanish speaker, but I had no idea how little that meant. And I went to Spain thinking, I've nailed this. Okay, I'm going to arrive and I'm just going to be able to talk to everyone and communication is going to be no problem. And I remember standing in Barajas Airport, 20 years old, waiting for my luggage, listening to the announcements, listening to the people around me. And I thought I was in the wrong country. I did not know where I was, but I thought they cannot possibly be speaking Spanish. I do not understand a single word. And so at that moment, I flipped from being unconsciously incompetent, from unconscious incompetence to being consciously incompetent, still completely incompetent, but aware of my incompetence. A good stage to be in because it propels you forward. And so if you keep working at something, you become consciously competent. What does that mean? It means you could get the job done, but you have to really, really focus. Okay. So I like to think of someone on a skateboard. Sometimes you see someone on a skateboard who's really, really good. I'm going to get to that person in a minute, but sometimes you see someone on a skateboard or they're just learning how to ride a bicycle. Yeah. And you could see they could stay up. They can move on that device. But they do so, you could almost see the level of attention and discipline and energy that they have to exert just to get from point A to point B. And finally, when you reach unconscious competence, that's where you can just ride a bicycle like it's second nature, or ride a skateboard. You could do tricks. You could go forwards, backwards. You could stop when you want to instead of crashing into a wall. That is unconscious competence. You don't even have to think about it. And by the way, this gets very close to habit, which we're going to talk about next. So how do you move through those stages? And by the way, at any point in time, all of us inhabit all 4 stages. It's not like, oh, I'm experienced, so I am only unconsciously competent. No, I'm certainly unconsciously competent about certain things, but I'm incompetent, both conscious and unconscious, about many, many other things. How do we move through those stages? First, by trying, by questioning. I have to tell you a true story. I would see a lot of people in New York City ride skateboards, which I think is weird, but they do it. And I would see people and they make it look so easy. And I said to myself, that looks so easy. I should try that. Me, unconscious incompetence. Okay, the happy idiot. So I went into a store and I told the guy I wanted to try a skateboard. And he looked at me and he said, have you ever done this before? And I said, no. And he said, are you sure? And I said, yes. And I stood on the skateboard for a nanosecond and I jumped right off. I realized immediately how difficult it was. I moved from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence, recognizing how incredibly difficult it was just to balance, let alone move. So by trying or questioning, we understand where in the competence matrix we fall through observation and imitation of others. And I have to say how lucky we are as legal professionals to be surrounded by such talented people. Professor Gatt and her team to start with, your colleagues, everybody else in the university community, people that you maybe work for at companies or law firms or NGOs or government organizations. And the way that observation and imitation work are really, you don't look at someone, you look at Professor Gott and you say, oh, I want to be like her. I'm gonna inhabit Professor Gott. I'm gonna try to become her. It doesn't really work for a number of reasons. One is that it's inauthentic because you're different from Professor Gott. We have to be authentic to ourselves in order to build a professional persona that is sustainable. But you might look at certain things about Professor Gott and say, she is such a creative scholar. I want to read as much about her work as I can. I want to talk to Professor Gott about her work as much as I can have that opportunity, because I want to understand how she can be such a creative scholar. How does she deconstruct things? I meet someone else and I say, this person is so organized. I want to try to understand his system for organization so that I can try to follow that. You meet another person, that person is a great presenter, and you say, I want to understand how that person presents so that I can be a dynamic presenter and people will listen to me. And you try to deconstruct what these people do. And in doing so, you create sort of a patchwork of, one thing you take from Professor Gott, one thing you take from someone else, one thing you take from someone else. And in this way, you build a professional persona that resonates with you. And finally, you move through these stages of competence by being coachable. What does this mean? It means being truly open and receptive to feedback. Let me tell you a story. A few years ago, before COVID, the era I like to refer to as BC, I met with someone, an acquaintance. I wouldn't call her a friend, an acquaintance. And she was unhappy with her work and she wanted some advice. And I said, sure, we'll meet for coffee. We met for coffee. And she was telling me her situation and I was coming up with some suggestions for her. And her response to every single thing I said was the same. She said, yeah, but. And it made me crazy. It made me crazy because she didn't really think about anything I said. She sort of had this gut reaction that she wanted to complain and that any solution that somebody offered to her was going to be defective. I'm not saying that you need to take every piece of advice that somebody gives you, but when you ask for advice, when you get advice from someone you trust and admire and respect, at least try to internalize it and think about it and, give it some thought. Let it percolate a little bit before rejecting it. That is a person who is really coachable, who understands that internalizing feedback is a strength and not a weakness. The second foundation is habit. And I have to say that when I started working on the professional persona, I realized that habits were important. But by the time I finished the book, and as I speak about it and do more research, I have come to believe that habits are pretty much at the root of most success. Habits account for something like 40 to 60%, believe it or not, of what we do every day. Everything from brushing our teeth to tying our shoelaces to, when you go into the supermarket and which I buy almond milk and I go to this place called Trader Joe and I know what color carton it's in and I know where it is. I don't have to start over. I know that exactly where it is and I look for the pink carton and I pull it. That's the unsweetened original almond milk. All of these things are things that we do almost instinctively. They have a true pattern of regularity. Why is this important? Because it saves us time and mental energy. How do we build habits? And let me just say a little bit more about the importance of habits, because I've read a tremendous amount. And by the way, if you're interested in learning more about habit, there's a wonderful book by a guy named Charles Duhigg, Duhigg, and it's called The Power of Habit. It's probably been translated into Italian if that's easier for you. It's very, very famous and it's very, very good. And he speaks about many, many longitudinal studies that have been done. I'll just give example one. They looked at teenagers, like 14, 15-year-old kids, and they looked at a group who made their bed in the morning and a group that did not make their bed in the morning. And they traced them for 25 years. And they found out that the kids who made their bed when they were 14 or 15 went to better universities, got better grades, got better jobs, were healthier, had more better, more successful personal relationships, partnerships, romantic partnerships, and were happier and healthier. because they made their bed? Sort of, because habits act as levers for other habits. Habits act as levers for other habits. Once you start to develop one good habit, other good habits flow from that. And these longitudinal studies have been replicated over time, over place, over different age groups, and so on and so forth. How do you build habits? The most important things are first to commit. You have to really be serious, which I don't like, which is the reason I don't like, for example, in the US, we have this thing, I don't know if you do it in Italy, but on New Year's Eve, everyone will ask you, what's your New Year's resolution? What do you want for the next year? And I hate that, because you're at a party, or you're at a bar, and someone says to me, what's your New Year's resolution? We'll just come up with something, because if you come up with something, it's not real. It has to be something you really, really want. Many of us want to use social media less. Many of us want to eat better. Many of us want to exercise more. Many of us want to spend more time with our families. Whatever those things are, you have to really, really, really want to do it. Why? Because it's hard work. The second important tip about a habit is you have to practice. There are differences of opinion among scientists. Some say you need 28 days to build a habit. Others say it's double that. Whatever it is, it's hard work. And during that period of time, you can allow no exceptions. Another personal story. About 7, 8 years ago, maybe, I had some surgery that was pretty serious. I'm totally fine. But it was bad enough that for 6 months, I couldn't go to the gym. I couldn't lift anything at all. Like, a book like this was sort of the heaviest thing I was allowed to lift. And I was gaining weight, and I just really need to get some physical activity. I'm not one of those people that can sit for long periods of time. And so I thought, gee, I wonder if it's possible to walk from my home. If you know New York at all, I live near Union Square, and I work up by Lincoln Center. And I thought, is it humanly possible to walk? It's totally humanly possible. It takes about 55 minutes, almost an hour. In the beginning, it took longer because I was recovering from surgery. And I decided that every single day I would walk to work and home from work. And in the beginning, it was really, really hard. I wasn't used to it. I was recovering from surgery. The weather got bad. The surgery was in September. In October, November, the weather started to get cold. It was raining. The key to my success was no matter what, I walked. I walked when it was raining, when it was snowing, when it was hot, when it was cold, when I was busy, when I was stressed, when I was running, whatever it was, I walked. And it became a habit. What does a habit really do to you? What a habit does, the brain loves to chunk information and chunk sort of sequences of events. So the sequence of events used to be, for me, I would walk out of my apartment, I would turn left, and I would get into the subway. The new sequence of events that I built over this month or 2-month period, whatever it might have been, was I walk out of my apartment, I turn left, I turn right, and I walk. And I get out of my office and I walk. And so today I still do this. And when I walk out of my home, I don't think, oh, should I take a bus? Should I take the subway? Should I take a car? Should I walk? That's what I do. I walk. That's what habits do. They remove the decision-making process. Now, building habits is easier when you're younger. Why? Because the brain has more neural elasticity when you're young. But don't use that as an excuse. Why? Because I could have, at the age of whatever I was when I started walking, 55, I could have said, well, I'm too old to learn a new habit, so I'll just be miserable and not get any exercise and sit on the subway again, which, by the way, if you heard what happened yesterday, I'm really glad I'm not taking the subway very often. It's pretty scary, actually. I don't make that decision anymore. The decision is, it's set for me. It's my habit. So even at an older age, you can build habits. There's a great Chinese proverb that I want to share with you. And it goes like this. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Boy, do I wish I built good habits 20 years ago, right? They would have been so much easier when I was younger. The second best time to plant a tree is today, is now. So make up your mind what you want to do. Now, one easy way to build a habit, and I want to go back to the social media thing I mentioned before, is by recalibrating your habit loop. Your habit loop. The habit loop consists of 3 elements, okay? One is some trigger, something that makes you do something. The something is the second part of the loop, and that's the habit. I'll give you an example in a minute. And the third part of the habit loop is the reward, whatever feeling of satisfaction or feeling of whatever that you get from doing that thing. So Charles Duhigg has an example. It's either in his book or it's on his blog or on his webpage or something. And he describes the issue that he had as this. Several years ago, he worked in an office, and every day at 3 o'clock, he would hit a little bit of a wall. And I get that. And I guess that's the time it is for you now. So I hope you're not getting that. But 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that was the trigger. He hit a wall. And what he did, he had a habit of going to the cafeteria in his office, buying a giant cookie and eating it while talking to colleagues. And then I guess he decided that he shouldn't be eating a giant chocolate chip cookie every day. And so he decided to re-engineer his habit loop. How do you do that? You keep the trigger the same. You find a different habitual action that will give you more or less the same reward. So a friend of mine had the same problem. I'll tell you my friend's story in a minute. Let me finish with Duhigg. So Duhigg said, okay, at 3 o'clock, something's got to happen. So the first day he said, okay, instead of eating a cookie, I'm going to eat an apple. That didn't work, obviously. The second day he said, okay, instead of eating a cookie, I'm going to go for a walk, stretch my legs, get a little fresh air. Maybe that will help. Didn't work. Third day he said, okay, maybe what I need is a little social interaction. I'm going to, instead of going to the cafeteria where I'm too tempted to eat a cookie, I'm going to go to the office of a colleague, knock on the door, and chat for a few minutes. Bingo, that worked for him. And that way he was able to swap out one negative habit for a much more positive habit. Let me tell you how this works with social media. Whatever trigger it is that sends you to Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or whatever young people are using these days, TikTok, instead of that, go to LinkedIn. I don't know about in Italy, but in the US, LinkedIn is really, really, really important for professional development. It might give you that same sort of voyeuristic feeling, but at the same time, it will be much more productive professionally. So it will be the same trigger leading to a similar reward, but swapping out one more unfavorable habit for a more positive, favorable habit. The next foundation is intelligence. And this is fraught for many of us. So I will say this, and I say it openly, and I say it not really even with much embarrassment. I used to be very insecure about my sort of raw executive power. I never learned what my IQ was, but growing up in my generation, IQ, intelligence quotient, was considered to be the determining factor as to whether or not you would be successful. Okay. If you had a high IQ, you'd be successful. Obviously, if you had a lower IQ, you would be less successful. What we understand now, and I think one of the great sort of developments in educational psychology from the last 30, 40 years has been that intelligence is actually really multidimensional and contextual. IQ is important, and I'm not going to say IQ is not important, but here's the great news. If you're smart enough to get in and out of law school, you're smart enough, okay? And the differences in IQ amongst us in the room, with me, let's say, being at the low end and one of you being at the high end, those are not, that difference is not a true differentiator of success. What really differentiates us with respect to intelligence is emotional and social intelligence. Emotional intelligence being sort of how I understand and moderate my own emotions. Social intelligence being people skills, how I respond to others, how I read others and respond to them. By the way, this is something that gets easier as you get older. That's called maturity, and that's just having a lot of experience with emotional and social intelligence and seeing people's reactions to different ways you respond. The other reason to focus on emotional and social intelligence is they can be improved over the course of your career, in the course of a lifetime. IQ, most people believe that IQ can't change, or maybe you can move the needle a point or two. You can't do much, so forget about it. You're smart enough when it comes to IQ. Where you can really put your energies is on emotional and social intelligence, which is very, very closely related to the final foundation, which is leadership. I take an approach to leadership that does not look at your position. So you might think, many of you being students, and you say, I don't have to be a leader, I'm just a student. Wrong. Because leadership is not about where you stand in any particular hierarchy. It's about a mindset. It's about a general orientation. So when you think about someone like Professor Gott, do you think Professor Gott woke up one day when she was younger and was a professor and then became a chair and then became, part of the Jean Monnet program? No, she didn't wake up one day and say, oh, I'm a professor, I guess I better figure out how to lead. She became a professor. She became a chair. She became part of Jean Monnet and the Erasmus Plus program because she inhabited the characteristics of a leader all along. So what is a leader? This is not easy to answer, because if you read about leadership, which I did quite a bit, you will discover that there are all sorts of definitions and understandings of leadership. So what do I think a leader is? I think first, a leader is someone who is goal-oriented. But these goals are not personal, materialistic goals. So a goal could be, but this is not the kind of goals I'm thinking about. By the time I'm 35, I want to make X amount of euros, and I want to have that house in Corsica or wherever you want to go. Okay. Not those kinds of goals. Goals for your professional development, goals for your service orientation, goals for your institution, right? What kind of professional do you want to be? And a leader then is able to move herself, others, and organizations towards those goals. A person who can inspire others to work towards those goals. That is, I think, what a leader is. And it turns out that there is a tremendous overlap between leadership and social and emotional intelligence. So if you develop your social and emotional intelligence, and there are tools for doing that, you can truly, truly become a leader. I want to turn now to self-management, professionalism, with the inside. And I have three categories of self-management. The first is mindset and dispositions. And this is where I think I grew a tremendous amount. There's still room for growth. And by the way, one thing to say about the professional persona is it's a lifelong process. And I consider that a really, really great thing. I should have mentioned this at the outset. A few months ago, I spoke at a law firm in Brazil. It's a pretty large, well-established law firm. And it was founded by a single guy. And he came he was in the Zoom room. He came to the presentation. He's 83 years old. He's created this law firm with hundreds of lawyers, one of the top firms in Brazil. And he came and he was so excited about developing himself. This is a guy who could just sort of say, I'm done. I did what I need to do. Now I want to play golf or go to the beach or sit at home and whatever, drink caipirinha. He didn't do that. He was really, really excited. And I think that's a beautiful thing about the professional persona. It enables change over the course of your career and the course of your life. So what do I think about when I think about mindset and dispositions? I first think about a positive mindset, one based on growth. What does that mean to have a growth mindset? A growth mindset, a person with a growth mindset is a person who says, I know I can get better at this thing. Maybe it's something that I'm a little challenged with. Maybe it's something that I don't find natural, okay? It doesn't come easy to me, but I know I can get better. A person with a fixed mindset, and by the way, a growth-based mindset a person with a growth-based mindset also says, I know that things aren't easy. I understand that everyone struggles to improve. A person with a fixed mindset says, I'm a slow learner. I just don't get this. I can never learn it. I'll never get better. There's no point in even trying. The problem with the fixed mindset is exactly that. Once you make up your mind that you cannot do something, you are not going to be able to do it, okay? There's a great quote from Henry Ford, and he said this, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Just think about that for a moment. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. A positive mindset is about optimism, not just sort of is the glass half empty or is the glass half full, but a sense of explanatory optimism. how do I view my own ability? How do I view my own sort of competence to get the job done, to grow, to be better? Do I view challenges as normal and something I'm excited about overcoming, or do I see my life as a series of setbacks and disasters? It's about grit. Grit is really perseverance, persistence, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, getting the job done. Resilience, I think of as falling down and getting up, but not just getting up. That's what you do. What else are you going to do? When you fall down, you get up. But getting up bigger, better, faster, stronger. Bigger, better, faster, stronger. Learning from those defeats, learning from those setbacks, and really getting stronger as a result. It's about a commitment to excellence in everything you do, being dedicated, being prepared, being resourceful. And it's about your character, being a person who is grateful when others do something for us, who is humble, who really wants to learn from others, who's a person of integrity, authenticity, character, wisdom. All of these things go into the character of a lawyer, being discreet. Time management is the second element of self-management. Do I have a magic bullet for time management? No, but I have a few suggestions. One is to be much more intentional about time than we currently are. I think that when we think about the way we spend time and when we think about the way we spend money, we find a disconnect. If somebody came up to me and asked me on the street for $250, let's say, unless they had a gun or a knife, I would say, no, I'm not going to give you $250. But when someone emails me and asks me for 30 minutes of my time, I always do it. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be generous. I think that one of the great things about the legal profession is how generous people are and how giving people are and how excited people are about sharing with others and mentoring and so on and so forth. And I think that's great. And I never want to change. But I do think there are times when I should say, no, not now, or no, or I can't do it this week. No, but write to me again in 2 weeks and we'll see then. To be just a little bit more deliberate about how we spend our time, a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more intentional, and to do a time budget. So many of us, especially when we're students or not, maybe not earning our full capacity at the moment, we have a financial budget. Okay, so if I were to do my financial budget, which I do from time to time, I see where money is going. If I feel like, gee, I spent a lot of money in the last few months, what was that? And I look at it and I say, oh, okay, there were a couple of extraordinary purchases. I needed a new computer, or, there was some sort of big purchase, right? But if I saw that, for example, I was spending $100 a week at Starbucks, I would say, oh my God, are you kidding? I had no idea I was spending $100 at Starbucks. I thought I was spending something like $20. And yes, I love my caramel whipped cream frappuccino, but not enough to have it every day to spend $100 a week. And so if I see where my money is going, I can adjust my spending. It's the same thing with time. When I did my time budget, when I was working on my book, I thought I was spending like 20 minutes a night on Netflix. And then I realized when I did my time budget, you're spending 60 to 90 minutes a night on Netflix. And then I was able to adjust. Some people might say, that's way too much. That's what I did. I said, I don't want to be spending an hour or more on Netflix at night. No, that's not right for me. But I didn't know I was spending that much until I did my time budget. So do a time budget, see where your time is going. Just like money, you can then make decisions based on what your experience is. Avoiding procrastination, not easy. Why do we procrastinate anyway? I think some people procrastinate because they're lazy. That's not us. Lawyers do not procrastinate because they're lazy. Lawyers procrastinate, I think, and other professionals, when we procrastinate because we have anxiety about a particular project. And I see this in myself very, very much. The things I procrastinate on are things that I'm nervous about, that I'm stressed about, that I don't feel very confident about. When I procrastinate, though, things just get worse, right? Because it's that, oh my God, it's this Jean Monnet lecture. I'm so nervous because I have to talk about technology. So I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And I live with this subtle or not so subtle anxiety for weeks and weeks and weeks. Here's a tip. Put aside 10 minutes, 15 minutes. 15 minutes is all. And say, I'm going to work on that thing that scares me. I'm going to work on that thing that scares me. And I'm going to see in 15 minutes, it's not so scary. I'm going to organize myself. I'm going to get my thoughts together. I'm going to make some notes. I'm going to do a little research, and I'm going to see, I now have a plan. And then what else can you do? You can schedule that project. When I have something that I'm nervous about, or I'm not getting to because it's too big, I'll schedule it specifically. So I'm very old fashioned. I keep a notebook with my to-do lists. Yeah. That's my notebook. But when things aren't getting done and they get carried over from week to week, I pick up my phone and I say from 6 to 9 in the morning, because I'm an early riser, from 6 to 9 in the morning, that's when I'm going to do XYZ project. It is proven, you have to be adaptable. That's what lawyers have to be. But it is proven that if you actually schedule it, you are more likely to get it done than if it is not scheduled. So try to schedule these things at a time when you're less likely to be disrupted by other things in your life. So what I was doing when I was writing this book, and here's another tip, I would put down in my calendar 6 to 9 every evening, write book. That didn't work because I would get to 6 o'clock and I would look at my calendar and say, write book? I can't write a book from 6 to 9. Break your projects down into smaller tasks. So if you're working on your dissertation, don't say, write dissertation. Say, write XYZ portion. That's what I did. I said, write time management portion of book. And I said, oh, I could do that in 3 hours. Okay, I could at least have a working draft of it, break things down, schedule them, and do them. Give yourself internal deadlines if you need it. Well-being is something that we're talking about a lot in the United States with respect to lawyers. And my guess is, I'm pretty sure that this is a conversation you're having in Italy and pretty much all over the world. Lawyers struggle with well-being. We struggle with well-being for a number of reasons. We're too busy. We're under a lot of stress. But there are also certain things about our profession that generate concerns or things that are troublesome for our well-being. Well, I'll get to some of these later. When I think of well-being, by the way, I think of it as more than getting out of bed in the morning, right? The ability to get out of bed, to not be so depressed that you can get out of bed, is not the right sort of scale. We have to think of it as much better. And it's a multi-dimensional concept that includes occupational well-being, social well-being, emotional well-being, and psychological well-being, intellectual, physical, spiritual well-being. All of these things contribute to your overall well-being. And when one of them is out of whack, like social, you have no social network because you're working all the time and you have kind of no friends and you're not seeing your family and you're not socializing at all. That's a huge problem, even if everything else is okay. So they all have to have some balance, and the balance will be different for different people. I want to talk about something that I've been working on lately, which is a mindset approach to well-being. In other words, we have more control than we think we do. And I'm going to be maybe a little bit controversial in these next slides talking about this, but I really, really have come to believe this. And I will say that for myself, and I really don't mind sharing all this, that for much of my life, I blamed things on circumstances and other people. Like, oh, it's my boss that's too unreasonable, or it's this ridiculous job I have that I have no time to myself and no time for my family and no time to foster relationships. Sorry. Where am I? But I decided that I wanted to take much more responsibility. And that was the first thing I did, was realize that I have agency, I have control, I have power. And I want to leave you with something, and that is this. Every second of every minute of every day is a choice you make, is a choice I make. And I can't blame anyone for those choices. I can evaluate those changes, and that goes into the personal inventory. Take stock of where you are and where you want to be and what's your plan for getting there. Are you on the path to what you want to do, to what you want to be? Or are you sort of being carried along by circumstance? Always remembering that you have those choices. There's a great story of a guy, I forget, his name was Marty something, and he was a very fine American tennis player. He was so fine that he was slated to play Roger Federer in the US Open. So he was really, total top tennis player. This was some years ago. And he was struggling with a very debilitating depression. And he was in the car on his way to the US Open to play Roger Federer. Sorry, I'm on a newish computer here. And he was struggling so much. And his wife said to him, Marty, you don't need to do this. And he said, what are you talking about? Of course I need to do this. What do you mean? And she said, you really don't. And he said, I have sponsors, I have my coaches, I have my teammates, I have the public, I have my, all these people depending on me. And then he said, wait a minute, I don't have to do this. And he bowed out of the US Open. We have choices. We have to base those choices on our own view of our personal inventory. We should be optimistic. And I know this is something we talked about earlier, to recognize that all of us face challenges, that challenges are part of life, that we should adopt an explanatory view of the world that is favorable, that believes we can do things, that believes we can get better. We should seek intrinsic motivation. Don't do stuff for money. Don't do stuff for advancement. Don't do stuff for other people's approval. Do stuff because it makes you feel good. Why? Because if you're looking for external approval, whether it be sort of a pat on the head by somebody, or if it be money or a better office or a better title, you're always going to be chasing someone. But if you seek joy in what you do, satisfaction or work well done, you can always achieve that. We lawyers are risk adverse, and that is what we are, at least in the US, and my guess is in Italy and other places as well. We are trained to be risk adverse in the sense that that's what lawyers do. They assess, evaluate, identify, and manage risk for their clients. In our personal lives, if we're too risk adverse, we may end up with some challenges. We will avoid situations because we're afraid. We will avoid relationships because we're afraid. We will avoid activities because we're afraid. You know what I started doing at the age of 60? Last year, I started rock climbing. And I'm pretty bad, but I do it. It's scary. If I fall, I'm screwed. I realize that I'm not young enough that I'll recover. I'm old enough that I will break bones. But I love this. And if I was too risk adverse, I would never try it. You would never ask that girl or guy out on a date. You would never give them your heart. Let yourself go a little. It's okay to be risk adverse for your clients because you have to identify every risk. Don't carry that into your personal life. Positivity, being upbeat. You know what? You're bored, you're depressed, you're miserable, you're tired. Take a step back and think about all the benefits, all the great things you have in life, all the things that we take for granted. Food security, shelter, an education, the prospect of a fulfilling, lucrative career. We have all these things. Don't take them for granted. At your work, if you're bored and you're miserable and you're overworked, step back and think about the kinds of clients you're working for, the kinds of opportunities you have, the kind of learning you're doing. Learn how to manage your stress. Look, here's one thing I will say. Stress is inevitable. Stresses are outside influences. You can't avoid them. You could try to minimize them, but you can't avoid them because you can't control your stress. You can't control external stressors. Some you can, but many you can't. But you can control your reaction to those stressors. You can allow certain stressful situations to destabilize you, to unnerve you, to really throw you off. Or you could say, I'm bigger than this. You could intellectualize it, get over it, get past it, move on. Now, not later. And this is very closely related to my next point. Not my next point. Now, not later. Okay, here's what I did for most of my life. This is what I said to myself for 40 years. Okay, I will get back to myself. I'll get back to my health. I'll get back to my family. I'll get back to building relationships, whatever. I'll get back to that after this exam, after this paper, after this year. Oh, this is after my degree. Okay, I got my degree. Now I'm going to law school. I got to do well in law school. After the first year, only first year grades are really important. Well, really second year grades are important too. After this, well, I got to pass. Well, my law firm needs me. Okay, in my first year, I got to work really, really hard because, otherwise I'll get fired after my first year. And then I got to work really, really. So after this, I'll get back to myself. You know what I discovered? I discovered that life does not get easier. Your obligations and your responsibilities are greater, in my experience, every single year. I have never once had a year that was easier than the year before. So do not defer your happiness, your well-being, your sort of emotional and psychological well-being for some other time. It may not come. If you're not careful, it will not come. You will always find a reason why it has to be later. So just decide now, again, going back to your personal inventory, what do you want? And how can you make that happen? And don't delay. Don't wait for next year. Start now and build that life that you want for yourself. Imposter syndrome. Many of us live with this. They say that this is more common among women. They say it is more common among other historically excluded groups. I don't know. I know many white men who suffer from imposter syndrome. What does it even mean? Imposter syndrome is you believe that you have gotten where you are. You have been successful because you are hardworking and diligent, but you're not that smart. And sometime soon, someone's going to figure out that you're actually not that good. That is wrong. I was going to use a bad word, but I know we're being recorded and I know this is a professional event. That is wrong. You got where you are because you're smart enough, and because you're hardworking, and because you're diligent, and because you're resourceful, and all those things. Those things are much more important than having a higher IQ. You belong where you are. You're there for a reason. Do not feel like an imposter. Busyness. Busyness is a product, and this is another thing that I struggle with. I struggle with still. I have struggled with it most of my life, probably my entire life. I'm working on it though. Busyness is the notion that I need to always be doing something. Okay. I can't just sit and relax and read a book, or I do take walks. I do my fitness, but I don't relax very well. Why? Because I feel like I'm missing something. I feel like I should be doing something. I feel like I don't deserve it. I feel like I'm in the habit of always doing something. There's always work to be done. No one in this day and age, back in the day before email, I would say it was possible to be sort of caught up, more or less. It's not possible now. We are never, ever caught up. And so this notion that you always have to be busy is largely a product of being an insecure overachiever. Let it go. Get your work done. Be efficient. Be effective. That's what people value. Not this notion of working all the time. Okay. Work when you want to. Work when you need to. But understand that it's okay to take a break. Dealing with your mistakes. You know, when I'm in a live room, I always ask the room, I say, raise your hand if you've ever made a mistake. My hand is the first one up. Most people raise their hands. Occasionally there's someone who's not raising their hand and I'm wondering, are you kidding me? We've all made mistakes. That's part of the human condition. Making a mistake does not make you a bad professional. It's how you deal with those mistakes. Deal with it. Try to minimize the impact as much as you can. Try to ensure that it doesn't happen again. And then, for God's sakes, move on. Do not ruminate over your mistakes. What is rumination? It's when you're up day after day, night after night, you can't sleep, you're tossing and turning, you're constantly worried because you made that mistake. Let it go. We all make mistakes. And again, if you manage that mistake as well as you can, you've done all that anyone can expect. Part of dealing with mistakes by not ruminating is having self-trust and self-compassion. Show the trust and compassion in yourself that you would show to others. We're often very hard on ourselves. We have a voice here, the inner critic on our shoulder, and that inner critic is always telling us, you did this wrong. You didn't do this as well as you should have. You should have managed that better. You could have handled that. Your lecture could have been better. Your written work could have been better. You should have done that more quickly, so on and so forth. What you need to do is balance that inner critic with an inner support network on the other shoulder that's saying, it's okay, Toni. You did the best you could under these circumstances. It was fine. It went just fine. Nobody even noticed. Everybody forgot that you made that mistake, or you lost your way a little bit, or you couldn't finish a coherent sentence. Nobody got that. Let it go. The Jaeger-Fine effect. I only learned of this recently. This is a tendency to keep worrying about undone stuff. What's the solution? The solution is to organize yourself. The solution for me is my to-do lists. Rather than in my head going over, oh my God, I have to do this, I write it down. Okay, write it down in a notebook, in your phone, whatever works for you. And finally, the Atlas complex. You are not Atlas. I am not Atlas. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. Let it go. Let it go. Realize that you are human and you can only do so much. You can, or I should say, you could do only so much. And I just had to write something down. I'm very, very sorry, because I should have added to this perfectionism. Perfectionism is a myth. You cannot be perfect. I cannot be perfect. We will never live up to this standard we set for ourselves of being perfect. Don't compare yourself to others, because that's what perfectionists do. They look for others who are better than them. Yes, you will always find someone who's better than you. You will always find someone who's better than you in certain things. You may even find someone who's better than you at everything. That's the way it goes. You can work towards becoming better, improving yourself. Use yourself as a baseline and try to improve, but don't compare yourself to others. That is ineffective and ultimately destructive. Relationships is the third sort of area that I want to touch on. The basics of relationships are learning how to collaborate. You know, law school, at least in the US, is a really individualistic endeavor where each of us works on our own. We do our reading or we don't. We go to class, we don't. We go take our exams, we do well or we don't. And then we're thrown into a legal profession in which the essence is collaborative. We must learn how to work with others. We must learn especially how to work with others who are different from us, whether they have different racial makeups, ethnicity, socioeconomic backgrounds, religious, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, whatever it is. We have to learn to engage in inclusive thinking. What does this mean? It means that we understand that the more people with different backgrounds that are sitting around a table with a voice, with a true voice, not just sitting there, but really with a voice, the more creative our problem solving will be. How do we know that? We know that. It's scientifically proven. That's why clients are pushing us. Companies are pushing us towards more diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not just because it's the right thing to do. Of course, it's the right thing to do, but it's also because clients realize what the rest of us are beginning to understand, which is problem solving is inherently more creative when we involve people with different experiences, different backgrounds, different perspectives, their views about problems, problem solving, solutions will be very different. Always be reliable. Be that person. If I give Emiliano a task, I know as the supervisor that Emiliano will get it done. He'll get it done well. He'll get it done on time. But maybe there's someone else, Marco, let's say. Marco does not have, and by the way, Emiliano now has a reputation for being reliable and everyone wants to work with him. And I know that if he faces a problem, he'll come back to me. I can release psychological ownership. I can forget about it because it's in the hands of a reliable person. Maybe there's someone else named Marco, and Marco does not have a reputation for being reliable. Sometimes he forgets projects altogether. He's usually late. Even when he does something, it's not very good. He has questions, but he doesn't ask. I don't trust him, so I have to constantly worry about this project. It's about accountability, about taking responsibility for your mistakes, stepping up, not blaming circumstances, not blaming others. Relationships is about learning how to be supervised effectively. You know, law is most legal departments in firms and companies and NGOs and government are pretty hierarchical. So you have to learn how to be supervised effectively. I have to learn how to be supervised effectively. I'm supervised too. You want to be proactive. You always want to be reading the boss's mind, thinking about what your supervisor needs and how you could help her. You want to make your boss look good. It doesn't mean you can't disagree with her. You can, of course, but you do it in the right way at the right time. You want to follow up, not just say, I've submitted my assignment, I'm done. No, follow up. Make sure that person is on it. Be responsive. Understand your expectations. Welcome feedback. Again, that viewing feedback not as, oh, this is where I get criticized, but as this is where I find out how I can be better. Don't you want to know how you can improve? Recognize that feedback, when your supervisor gives you feedback, this is an investment in you. This is your supervisor taking time to invest in you. You also want to learn how to effectively supervise. by sharing information openly, by providing opportunities to observe, by providing continuous and contemporaneous feedback that is geared not towards past behavior, but towards future behavior, to enable autonomy and passion. There's a series of articles written by Deloitte, the big accounting firm, called referring to the passion of the explorer. Don't you want everyone in your team to embrace the passion of the explorer? And finally, to recognize the service nature of the profession. Look, nobody comes to a lawyer because they like going to a lawyer. Okay, let me tell you another personal thing. I like brunch. Every weekend, one day I go for brunch. Saturday or Sunday, doesn't matter. And I have a nice meal, and maybe I have a mimosa or a margarita. I have a nice little brunch cocktail, and then I come home and take a nap. I love this. This to me is like a real treat. It's something that I've developed relatively recently. I love this. People don't come to lawyers because they love coming to lawyers. That's not what we do, okay? We are problem solvers. People come to us because they have a problem, business or personal, or a goal, business or personal, and we help them move from A to B. If you remember that always, you will always remember the service nature of the profession and understand what that requires. To be compulsively responsive. And I'm quoting someone, and I don't know who it was, unfortunately, because it was during our Law Firm Management program. And I remember the quote because it really moved me, but I don't remember exactly who the speaker. But that person said that every lawyer that has contact with a client should delight that client at every touch point. Delight at every touch point. Communication, clarity above all. There's a quote, it's been attributed to many different people, so I don't really know who said it, that you should not write to be understood. You should write so that you cannot be misunderstood. Clarity above all. Then to be concise and efficient as possible within your language's constraint. So I know that I don't speak Italian, but I do speak a little Spanish. And I know that there's similar languages, all the Romance languages. In Spanish, you use more words than you use in English. It's like Italian, Spanish is much more beautiful than English. It's much more eloquent, but English is very concise and efficient. Remember, we are not writing literature. We are not writing for Pulitzer Prizes. We are work writers, and we are writing for work readers. And so the more concise you can be, the better you off, whether you're speaking or writing. Animating factors, whenever you're communicating, always keep in the front of your mind two things. Your audience, who are you speaking to?
Toni,
Yeah.
do you hear
Yes.
me? Oh,
Yes.
Thank you so much indeed. I'm hearing you, and I'm really enthusiastic of your speech. Really fantastic. Thank you so much indeed. I'm mortified, but I must interrupt you, unfortunately, because we have another seminars after your lecture. But considering the importance, the things you are saying, I think that you can go on this subject in your lecture at the beginning of your next lecture in your course of Introduction to U.S. Law, if you agree. Please tell me if you agree about that.
I agree,
Because
Professor. Please don't be
fantastic.
mortified. I am clearly talking too much.
No, absolutely not. And before I do, I must thank you because you have shown our students a way to achieve their goals, the real ones, and not the materials ones, without getting lost behind false myths such as IQ or material possessions. Thank you so much indeed for that, Toni. You said 1,000 important things. You have also given precise instructions on the size of the goals, on the timing, on organization, management, but also on the courage to confront others without imitating them. I must also say that you guide to practice successfully, but above all, with balance, is valid universally, even in Italy, where being inclusive and thinking in an institutional way does not always reward. Thank you very much indeed, Toni. See you to your next lecture in a few days.
See you soon, and my apologies for talking too long. And Professor Gott, thank you and your team and all of the wonderful people who are here with us today.
No, thank you too so much, and see you very, very soon.
Ciao, ciao. Happy
All
Easter,
your
everyone.
students, we are we are grateful to you. Thank you so
Ciao,
much.
ciao.
indeed.
Thank you, Professor. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Happy
Bye,
Easter.
Toni. Bye, see you soon. Bye. Buonasera a tutti. Siamo qui per iniziare oggi con i vari studenti che stanno entrando rapidamente. Oggi iniziamo il ciclo che dà l'avvio alle attività dell'anno accademico 2021-22, cioè l'anno accademico in corso della cattedra Jean Monnet on European Protection Law of Individuals in Relation to New Technologies, acronimo Protech. Oggi iniziamo questo ciclo di seminari che, come sapete, è un ciclo di seminari approvato dal Senato accademico, dal nostro Dipartimento di Scienze Giuridiche, che ha conferito e previsto la possibilità del punto bonus per tutti gli studenti che sono qui presenti e che sono un certo numero, perché so che i miei collaboratori presenti in aula, il dottor Davide Della Roia e l'avvocato Aulino, hanno la lista dei presenti e chiaramente controlleranno nell'elenco dei partecipanti la loro presenza.
Professoressa, mi scusi, se dopo ci dà giusto un minuto possiamo fare anche l'appello.
No, l'appello eviterei, Livia cara, perché diciamo noi vediamo direttamente dall'elenco, perché insomma se no diventa una cosa un po' pesante. Allora, grazie comunque Livia per il tuo suggerimento, sempre prezioso. C'è ancora una condivisione in corso, se la vogliamo interrompere, ecco, perfetto. Come potete constatare, noi abbiamo qui il calendario complessivo del ciclo seminariale che terminerà il 19 maggio e che inizia oggi. Il ciclo seminariale si svolgerà in presenza e online. Oggi avremo due colleghe valorosissime che inaugureranno il ciclo, e sono due professoresse in materie, in ambiti scientifici completamente diversi, ma proprio per questo le abbiamo accolte con estremo piacere e siamo onoratissimi della loro presenza. Ve le presenterò adesso brevemente, sperando che siano già collegate. Se Davide e Livia mi danno un feedback su questo, se le professoresse Valeria Falce e Fiorella Battaglia sono già tra noi. Io sto aspettando questi 2 o 3 minuti in più proprio per consentire a tutti gli studenti di iscriversi. Vedo anche la dottoressa Confortini che si è collegata e che saluto con molto piacere. Grazie Valeria per essere qui con noi. Io avevo pensato di dare la parola in ordine alfabetico alle due colleghe che oggi si sono iscritte.
Credo che sono uscite per problemi di connessione, perché prima c'erano.
Perfetto, allora io a questo punto, se mi consentite ragazzi, ora puoi. Io darei la parola, adesso vediamo un attimo, perché forse è meglio darla prima alla collega Falce che fa un'introduzione su etica ed economia, e poi invece la professoressa Battaglia che ha un focus specifico sul tema. Adesso chiedo a loro, così ci mettiamo d'accordo direttamente. E quello che volevo anticipare agli studenti presenti, come vi avevo già detto, innanzitutto è importante ai fini del rilevamento della presenza, ecco vedo la collega Falce, ben arrivata Valeria, buonasera, cattedra Jean Monnet, la professoressa Falce dell'Università Europea di